Hello, everyone. And geez, I would say welcome, but this isn't a chummy let's have fun together talking the wonderful world of ponies kind of video. No, this is probably one of the most serious and most uncomfortable videos I've ever done. You see, when the promo clips for Brotherhooves Social started to come out, no one expected to see Big Mac wearing women's clothing. I mean, we knew he was going to be trying to pose as Apple Bloom's sister, but wow, were we bronies caught off guard. Now, one of the first things that came of this promo clip being released was a resounding phrase from various LGBT supporters: trans is not a joke. These people were furious that Big Mac wearing women's clothing was being played for laughs, and they felt it was a stab at the transgender community. Alternatively, the other side was arguing that it's just a show and there's no need to get so worked up about this. But was it actually shots fired at the LGBT community? Well, that's what I'm here to help uncover. So please, no matter what your stance is about Brotherhooves Social, I hope you can stick around for my analysis of this episode. I think both sides might be surprised with my findings. Let's look at the naysayers first. Fans who weren't offended by this episode claim that it's no big deal. It's just a kid's show, right? Well, let's look at some science, shall we? First off, what does it truly mean to be transgender? According to dictionary.com, the definition for transgender is, quote, noting or relating to a person whose gender identity does not correspond to that person's biological sex assigned at birth, end quote. Gender identity, if you have been totally living under a rock for the last 20 years, is simply whether one sees themselves as male or female, regardless of sexual organs. And no, for those wondering, gender identity has absolutely nothing to do with sexual orientation. A straight man can like a straight woman just the same as a transgender woman can be lesbian and like lesbian women. Both may be men at birth, but they have different gender identities. That's it. There is a stigma surrounding gender that says the gender is solely determined by your sexual organs, but this is simply not true. Looking at dictionary.com again, gender is defined more by, quote, social and cultural roles and behavior, end quote. In layman's terms, how someone is expected to and does act based on their physical sex. If you have a hard time understanding this concept, think of gender not as someone who is a boy or a girl, but rather think of the male gender as exhibiting masculine qualities like toughness and self-confidence, and think of the female gender as exhibiting feminine qualities like politeness and a caring heart. When these qualities are present in a certain sex, we call these gender roles. Male fans of MLP are already challenging these gender roles, as it's expected for only girls to like My Little Pony. So, based on this definition, gender is more of society's expectation on who you should be based on what's between your legs. Gender identity, however, is more about what traits that you feel more comfortable exhibiting, and it's not mutually exclusive to just one sex as gender may be. If you feel more comfortable behaving like a girl, but you have dingleberries, then you are a biological male that identifies as a female, or in other words, transgender. Since gender versus gender identity is a battle between society and one individual, it's often very taxing on the soul. My girlfriend, Fate, is a transgender male to female, and while I may not personally know her struggles since my gender identity matches my biological sex, I do know how much she struggles. Most transgendered people want their physical sex to reflect their gender identity so it can be in equilibrium. Not to delve too deep into my girlfriend's personal life, but being transgendered and wanting to not only have your body reflect how you feel inside, but also be accepted by people for changing something so monumental about yourself, and not having either of these things come true, is crippling. 41% of trans people commit suicide due to how harshly the world treats them, and there have been times that I've feared my girlfriend would join these statistics. So, how does this relate to what happens in Brotherhooves Social? Well, one of the biggest ways to express one's gender identity is through fashion. Fashion is very gender specific. That is why practically all department stores have two separate sections for clothes, one for men, one for women. So when Big Mac wears a dress and some makeup, it could be argued that he's expressing a different gender identity that is different from his biological gender, hence him being transgender. This is why the LGBT is upset with this episode. If this is in fact the case, and Big Mac is indeed expressing his female gender identity, seeing everyone give him odd looks, knowing full well the writers wanted this to be humorous, is really messed up. So all you naysayers, keep in mind, trans isn't a joke. It shouldn't be a joke, ever. as people's lives may be put on the line with every rude comment or gesture targeted at them. So don't act like making fun of trans people isn't a big deal, because it very clearly is. However, now I have to address those offended by this episode and think it's aimed at poking fun at transgender people. I hate to break it to you, but it isn't. Let me explain. Going back to what I said a moment ago, if Big Mac was trying to express a female gender identity with this episode, yes, you would have every right to be upset. But here's the cold hard truth. He isn't. If Big Mac came out in a dress and started telling everyone that he identified as Orchard Blossom and that this was who he really felt like he was meant to be inside, then yes, he would be trans. But this isn't what happens. Big Mac only puts on this disguise to fool the other contestants into thinking he's female simply so he can compete with Apple Bloom in the Sisterhood Social. He still identifies as a male. He's putting on an act. Instead of expressing a gender identity, Big Mac is in fact partaking in drag. Drag is defined by dictionary.com as, quote, marked by or involving the wearing of clothing characteristically associated with the opposite sex, end quote. Drag is actually more of a type of performance than anything else, and has absolutely nothing to do with gender identity or sexual orientation. There are also roughly a dozen or so styles of drag. These include the club kids, people who stretch the definition of what clothes actually are, and wear things more akin to artistic pieces that aren't really related to any specific gender. Skag, which is defined as feminine clothing or makeup clashing with very masculine body features like facial hair and big muscles. And high drag, which exaggerate feminine features such as lips, busts, and yes, even booty, to extreme levels. There are many, many, many more types of drag out there, and I encourage you all to go poke around online to discover them all. But I like to cover the two types of drag that are likely displayed in Brotherhooves Social. The lesser likely form of drag that Big Mac is portraying here is known as Camp Queen. Camp Queens are geared towards comedy. It is their goal to make you laugh at the absurdity of people who are clearly of one sex trying to humorously portray members of the opposite sex. I hate to make really controversial comparisons here, but the best way I can describe camp queens is that they are akin to people who used to wear blackface on stage. Now, I in no way condone the use of blackface, but blackface was a form of performance art where a white man tried to humorously portray a black man on stage by darkening his skin with face paint. Of course, the humor here is mostly based on false stereotypes, so it's not entirely like camp queens in that aspect, but their main goal for the performance is basically the same, to portray the opposite kind of person in a humorous light. Maybe it was the writer's goal to make us, the audience, laugh, but since it wasn't Big Mac's goal to make the other contestants laugh, I'd say he probably wasn't trying to be a camp queen. It is more likely, however, that Big Mac is pulling off a newer form of drag, Fishy Drag. People who partake in Fishy Drag have a totally different goal to accomplish with their drag performance, to actually blend in with society. It's called Fishy Drag because the true sex of the person partaking in it is confusing or fishy. They aim at perfecting their look to pass off as the opposite sex to everyone they come across. They play with the illusion of being that opposite sex, perhaps even trying to get mistaken for physically being that opposite sex. That sounds exactly like what Big Mac is trying to do here in Brotherhooves Social. He's trying to trick everyone into believing he's a female so he can partake in the Sisterhood Social with Apple Bloom. It could be argued about the degree of his success, since seemingly every pony but that elderly stallion saw through Big Mac's Fishy Drag, but I'd say that Big Mac was in fact performing in Fishy Drag in this episode. He wasn't trying to assert any transgender identity. He was simply putting on a show and trying to get mistaken for a cute southern mare. So, I hope this supplement video cleared up any misunderstandings about this episode and can be used to put the controversy surrounding it to rest. If you haven't seen my review of this episode yet, well, that's because I haven't made it yet. But when I do, you can click the annotation on screen or the link in the description to check it out when I finally do make it. As always, I'm Critical of Thought, and I'll see you all in my next video. Never stop thinking critically.